This short video gives a guide to the use of the VitalMonitor software program. To start VitalMonitor, double click on the red heart on the desktop that's following the installation. A window opens and may initially have a black empty screen like this. If you have a lightning monitor to connect to the computer, connect it now, turn it on, and then you need to go into the setup on the screen, go to setup and turn data output from what is normally set at none when the machine arrives to cable, and then all the data will start to appear like this. Okay, once you have data coming in, we can start to pay some attention to the simple entry requirements to this software. So we see in the center of the screen there's a requirement, or it's asking us to put a pet and owner's name in. This isn't mandatory, and you can just click OK with them empty and it'll record them as anonymous. I'm just going to put the pet in as Rover, Rover, and the owner's name is Smith. And I'm going to not click on this one here, enter chart data at start. I'm going to leave that unticked, and we'll come back to that in a little while. Okay, once we do that, then the screen shows all the monitoring, and we have an indication up here that the recording has already started. So we've got a red stop button here to stop the recording, but now we have the recording in progress, and you'll see up here that we have the elapsed time since the monitor was started, the program was started, and the actual start time. Very briefly, we have a number of traces here. We have ECG, we have CO2, pulse oximetry, blood pressure, and non-invasive blood pressure. And at the top we have the option to turn these traces on or off. I'm going to just turn off the invasive blood pressure and on the non-invasive blood pressure, and leave the ECG, the CO2, and the pulse oximetry. Just to show the data coming in from my unit, I'm going to put the pulse ox probe on my finger now, and we should just see a waveform appear in a couple of seconds showing the pulse ox waveform. There we are. So the waveform shown here, we have the saturation percentage and the pulse rate shown here as well. Now this is exactly what's happening on the lightning monitor, and it exactly mirrors what's happening there. For the CO2, we have this trace here, and I'm going to just do a few breaths on the through the capnograph just to get some traces to appear on the screen. Okay, so you see the CO2 traces coming in. I'm not happy about the colour or the speed of that trace, but we'll just come back to that in a moment and we'll show you how to change that. And at the top we have an ECG recording coming in here. There are no electrodes connected to me at the moment, so we just have a flat line, but we would have the ECG trace here. As we saw earlier, removing and adding traces is easy. If I want to hide the ECG, I go up to here where it says ECG 6 and click on hide, and now I only have the two traces, CO2 and pulse oximetry. Just going to bring that ECG back like that, and we're going to just begin to look at how we modify the traces. So going back down to the pulse oximeter here at the bottom, I see that trace is really quite big, and if I wanted to change its height, I would just right click, go to the vertical setting, height, and make it small compared to what its normal height is now. There we are, there's a change in the height. If I want to change how fast that goes across the screen, I again right click, I go to horizontal, I go to speed and choose my speed. So I'm going to slow that down to 12.5. There we are. And if I change that to 25, then we see it change there. So it's easy to change the characteristics of any trace just by right clicking and selecting the option there. Now, as I said at the beginning, I wasn't too happy with the speed or the colour of my CO2 trace, so I'm just going to right click, go to speed of the CO2 and drop that down to 12.5, so we've got nice slow and more recognisable capnograms. So there's a nice, almost square capnogram, so that's really nice. But I don't like the colour, so I'm going to just right click and go into Properties and Standard Properties, and this attribute box will appear on the side. And see the colour here is shown as this yellow. Just going to drop that and change it to white. And then I'm going to click Finished. And then a little dialog box pops up and says the current value has not been saved, and do I wish to save them? I'm going to say yes. It's going to introduce another concept here from the software. So if you look at the top of the screen here where it says Preset Default, it's currently running the default preset, but I want to set this to my own preset, so I'm going to select KS Preset and I'm going to save it. Now what this means is that the screen setup, the alarm setups, what's present on the screen, the sweep speeds of the traces are all saved in this preset called KS Preset. So when I next load the program or run the program, I can load KS Preset and everything will be set up just as I want it. So now we see if I breathe into the capnograph, we should get some nice normal white looking traces. Okay, so that's what we would expect, and that's quite normal. Now, a lot of you may wish to be looking at units in millimeters of mercury rather than percentage, so we can change that as well. Again, we go into Standard Properties and show the display as millimeters of mercury. So change that, click on Finished, and we'll save those into my preset again. So next time I come in, everything will be in millimeters of mercury. And now when I breathe in and out, the values will be reported will be in millimeters of mercury. Okay, it's a very simple to use bit of software, very straightforward. As you saw when we entered the software, it started recording immediately. That we clicked on the OK button, as soon as the traces appeared, it started recording. Now, it will produce the anesthetic record chart for you automatically. I just want to point out one feature that you need to be aware of if you want to record all the data in there. It may be that you want to record your agent levels and your fresh gas flow levels. If we look down here in the bottom right corner, we have what's called chart data, and if I right click on that chart data, a little box pops up and I can put in my agent level. So I'm going to put that in. At the moment my patient's on 2.3% isoflurane. I've got a fresh gas flow of 3.5 litres. I'm not got a ventilator attached, so I'm not going to record the tidal volume or the peak inspiratory pressure, just those two, and click OK. What this means is that every 5 minutes when the data is taken to form the anesthetic record chart, that data will be taken from that chart data. So whenever you change the agent concentration or whenever you change the fresh gas flow, just update that in the corner and that will then appear on your anesthetic record chart. So there's one area of the screen we haven't looked at the moment. I just want to bring your attention to that. So over to the left we have all the trend lines for the data. So because I'm not using some of these, I'm going to remove them. So I'm not using the agent, so I can take the agent and I can hide that trend. I'm not using the oxygen, so I'm going to hide that trend. I'm not using IBP, hide that one. I'm not using the NIBP at the moment, I'm going to hide that one. It's easy to bring them back again. And I'm not using the nitrous, so I'm going to hide that trend. Okay, so now they show trends. So my pulse ox is 100% saturated. It will also show me the heart rate if I want to just look at the traces. It says pulse, I can change it to look at the trend for pulse, and there's my trend for pulse. I'll put that back to percentage, show my trend for percentage. CO2 shows the few breaths I took over the last few minutes, and that's just the trend there. And again, you can change what we see. We can change that to a rate, and we can change it back to the inspired expired values. The general principle for the software is whenever you want to change something related to the traces, just do a right click in that trace and then a number of options appear. We've gone through a couple already, so we know how to change the horizontal speed, we know how to change the vertical height. If there's a big change you want to scroll, then show the scroll bar, and that will allow you, if I do this now, to change the offset. And the same with the ECG. If I want to change the offset for the ECG, I can do this. And that's quite useful if you're looking at maybe birds where the complexes are upside down. You want the baseline to be high. If you're looking at a normal dog or cat ECG, you want the baseline to be low. One other thing you may have seen when we went into the right click is it says add event. Without going into too much detail now, it's possible to click on there and put in some straightforward events, pre-recorded events, say procedure ended, and click OK. Now that saves an event into the log that we can look at later in the VitalStore software. Presets we've seen, and properties we've seen. Layout is probably a bit advanced for this brief introduction. It allows us to change where the traces sit on the screen, and also to change all sorts of things like where the numbers sit and how big they are and the colours they are. We can hide the trends as we've seen, and last option here is to look at the alarms. So we can look at, because I've clicked on the CO trace, I can look at the inspired alarms, and this just shows you a couple of concepts. We have the red value, which is the alarm value, and we have this thing called an approach value. So I'm just going to set these alarm settings for inspired millimeters of mercury, and actually I'm going to set the alarm values for the the expired. There we go. So here's my upper enabled and lower enabled. So what I'm saying here is that I want it in the green zone between 42 and 19. If it goes over 42, but before it gets to 46, we have this approach zone where we'll get a warning that the level's getting high before it actually goes into an alarm state. Once it goes to 46 or greater, we'll enter an alarm state, and we'll have the alarm indications of a red value shown on the screen, flashing audible alarm if that's set, and a description of the alarm that's been caused. But this approach region here just allows you to be aware of the impending alarm and maybe take some steps to prevent that before it actually becomes an alarm itself. Okay. Once we've been happy with our recording, we can, and the animal's finished and the anaesthetic is finished, we would then go to the stop button and click on stop, and you'll see that we have a lot of all the recordings that we could record are all shown here ticked. Unless you have any specific reason not to record these files, I'd leave all those clicked and then click on save. It saves the file and automatically creates an anaesthetic report for you. Tells you that it's been saved. You see it's named Rover Smith, and it's got a time and date in stamp. Now we're monitoring on the screen now, but we're not recording. So if another patient was added, so we disconnect this patient, and we then prepare, bring in the next patient, and then reconnect, and the patient starts to show data on the screen. We would then start recording again, put in the new data. This is now Molly, and this is Molly Johnson, click OK, and then up here you see that the tabs show Molly is the patient, and now we're recording again. So it's very simple. You can just start the recording as soon as the patient's connected. If it's the first time the program's been run, it'll do it automatically. Then you stop it and then start it again for each patient that you anaesthetise and each patient that you record. And a separate recording and session will be saved for each one of those patients. Okay, this is a quick run through. I'm just going to show you a couple of other things. We have this, we're in the general screen here, the green one. The next one next to it is a dedicated ECG screen, where we can look at the ECG in detail. We can have a number of leads. We can select which lead we'd like to look at. We can look at all 6 leads if we like, so we have a trace running across like this. We can just look at the major 3 leads, or we can just look at lead 2, like that. Up here we have what is a trend line, so we can actually look at some history. If we right click on that display and look at the trend, we can change that to an analyzer, and in the analyzer function we can make some very broad measurements, and they're reflected here. This is just to give you some idea of QRS durations and R-wave heights while it's actually on the fly. But this all forms part of the diagnostic part of the software. So I'm going to go back to my trend line, and I'm going to go back to my monitoring screen. And just showing you that we can change anything we need to by means of the right click, and the right click is active whether it's over the trace or whether it's over the numbers. The left click has no effect in the active monitoring state, so it's all done by the right click. One other thing, last thing maybe to mention, is we do have some clutter down at the bottom of the screen because I haven't turned off the agent concentration, the nitrous or the oxygen, which isn't in use at the moment. And then we'll see that next to it we have the temperature coming in here, and also if we're connected to a box, then we have, as we do now, we have the battery voltage of the lightning box showing here. It enables us to keep an eye on the battery voltage for that unit. I'm going to conclude this brief instructional video here, because that gives you an indication and overview of the setup and early monitoring behavior of the VitalMonitor software. Remember, the VitalMonitor software is the one that's indicated by the red heart icon on your screen. Thanks for listening, and you may wish to look at the further videos on the VitalStore, where we go through looking at some of the recorded data and how we can analyse and print that data off. Thanks for listening.